The man with the eye of glass stands on the shores of the ruins. When he looks out at them, he sees a dizzying sight. The ruins, yes, but also the city that built them. And not just that, but also the empty field of scattered trees and thin grass that would someday stand there when even the ruins had turned to dust. He looks to the sky and watches as the Kraken splits apart at the seams. He does not flinch when the earth shakes under his feet with the impact of wreckage. He knows it will not hit him. He has seen how he dies, has seen it since he was a child. He does not die here, and he does not die now. He sees the Kraken as it is now, as it was new, and as it will be in 10 days, and 100, and 1,000. It used to make him dizzy, used to leave him marooned in bed. Now he knows how to let all that time wash over him. He knows how to let it go. Most of it. He looks to the sky, and it isn't the Kraken that draws his eye. He sees the sword. Knowing how close it is makes it hard for him to focus. He forgets, for just a moment, to let the past and the future be. The sight of it all hits him with a physical force, and he staggers. With a shake of his head, he straightens. He knows what he must do. He turns away from the Kraken and Bluebeard and the boy, and yes, even the sword. He cannot see all the paths he must travel, but he sees enough. He knows that the road to the city will bring him back to the sword. On the frozen ramparts of a palace, he will come face to face with the source of all the pain that has replaced his very bones, the way minerals in the earth create fossils. He will face it, and he will take it, and he will have his revenge. And anyone who dares get in his way will face the force of all the time that inundates him every moment of every second of his life. Welcome to the season finale of Palace of Mirrors Season 1. Before we begin, I have a couple of announcements. After weeks of work, the website for the podcast is finished. You can find it at palaceofmirrorspodcast.com. This will be the place to look for updates about the state of the podcast. The other thing I'm excited to announce is that I've launched a Patreon for the podcast. You can join me on this adventure by searching Palace of Mirrors on Patreon or following the link on my website. I have a bonus podcast planned for members of the Patreon. And now, the conclusion to Season 1, Everything Must Fall, Part 3. Darien chased the echo of his own feet down the corridor. Lighting had become intermittent. Without warning, he would find himself plunged into darkness. In the shadows, he conjured beasts, whatever thing he had seen in the space between the engine's visions. But when the lights flickered to life, he found only abandoned passageways. An alarm wailed, the blaring tone impossible to tune out. In the distance, somewhere further down the hall, somebody had begun to scream. Their voice had more in common with a storm wind than human vocals. It rose in pitch, angry and desperate, and then sputtered and at last went silent. Several turns further, Darien found Skeleton pinned by a dagger to the bulkhead. His sunken dead eyes stared out, and Darien couldn't help but read accusation behind the veil of death. He tried to tell himself Skeleton had been a bad man, one of the pirates who had helped to tear Tom and Cassie's family apart. He tried to tell himself he had made the just choice. The dead man on the wall could not speak, but his silence was loud enough. The ship shivered like a person caught out in a storm. Everyone Darien had ever known had been forced to navigate a whiteout at least once. He knew all too well the way a body shook as it struggled to survive conditions it had never been meant to weather. He knew the feeling of betrayal when fingers and toes went numb, when your limbs became clumsy, when your thoughts couldn't be torn from the cold that had slipped into them. This ship had destroyed lives, and yet Darien felt regret as it died around him. The ship had sheltered him for months. He had cared for it, Gent at his side. How many years had it flown before Darien stumbled into the storeroom? How many stars had it seen? What journeys had it been on? The deck lurched under Darien's feet. And this time it did not right itself. Looking up the hall, Darien knew the docking rig must have sheared under the incredible stress of the ship's weight. Only the ship's small thrusters remained to struggle on, resisting the relentless acceleration of gravity. A series of booms sounded against the hull, just a brief warning before the corridor exploded, and a concussion wave tossed Darien carelessly down the hall. He tumbled, feeling more like an object than a human with agency. He lay blinking, his skin ached from the heat, and his ears felt muffled. A piercing ring made it hard to find his thoughts as wind crawled into the ship and whipped his hair around his face. Smoke, thick and black, billowed along the ragged edges of the torn hull. Darien staggered to his feet. Dizziness spun the ship in impossible directions, but step by step it faded. Outside, through the haze, Darien glimpsed city lights, fragile against the growing dawn. The life of one girl is just a drop in the bucket, Darien coughed, toxic fumes clogging his throat. Exhausted, his eyes watering, his ears ringing, he longed to slide to the floor. He had traveled so very far from his bed beside the stove, and it had been such a long time since he had been able to rest. A shadow swept between the city and the Kraken. Darien recognized it as the silhouette of another ship, the ship that had split the Kraken's skin wide. He felt a wave of anger, though it made no sense given his actions. In that moment, he knew the Kraken had become more than just an astonishing object torn from one of Kathy's stories. It had become more than an implement of torment for his world. It had even become more than Bluebeard, who had put so very much of himself into the ship. The Kraken had become his home. He did not regret his choice to destroy the ship. It had been the only thing to do. The only way to save Six, to save Darien, to maybe even save Bluebeard. It had been the right choice, but it had been his choice to make. He had earned it all those months of terror and wonder. Who stood on the bridge of that other vessel? What right did they have to go after the Kraken? Darien found his way down the corridor, through the ship, and at last the hatch that led to the bridge. Through the porthole window in the hatch, Darien saw Bluebeard in the captain's seat. The old man held a hand over his stomach. Night, the blade stained red, leaned against the chair. The ship shook, the window thrumming with the vibration, and Darien thought of Marialla. If he died now, no one would remain to save her. Was it fair of him to risk his life on the captain who had hurt so many? Shouldn't he turn away, find the nearest escape pod, and go rescue her? They could return home and live their lives by the rhythm of the passing seasons. Darien took a half step back from the door, but stopped short. He couldn't shake the image of Bluebeard below the palace of mirrors. The echo of the man's sobs, so broken and so lost, sounded in Darien's ears. How long had the man lived so? Bluebeard shifted in his seat and smiled when Darien strode onto the bridge. With a grunt, the captain stood. Sweat glistened on his forehead, but he lifted Night with the ease of a man long practiced holding a sword. He pivoted to face Darien, and his smile widened to a grin. I have you to thank for all this, don't I? He gave Night a little flourish. By my own word, you must die. Darien gave a curt nod and drew his sword. His heart thundered in his chest. Would it really all end here, like this? Bluebeard stood poised before the dawn. No one else remained on the bridge. Darien couldn't help but think of the first day they'd met. He had been so afraid. Now his hand shook with a different kind of fear, a fear not for his own life. He feared for Bluebeard, that the captain would let his pride keep him chained to the bridge of this sinking ship. The captain glanced behind Darien and raised an eyebrow. Where's Twilight?
Dead. Dragoneye killed him.
Bluebeard gasped, his hand tightening over his abdomen.
Oh.
Something went out of Bluebeard in that moment, almost like he couldn't catch his breath.
My old friend, my dear old friend.
Darien took a step toward Bluebeard. The edge of a smell turned his stomach, but he couldn't quite place it.
I don't understand, though.
I sent Twilight to fetch you before you and Gent could sabotage the Kraken. Clearly Dragoneye put a stop to that, but if
Twilight is dead,
what are you doing here? 1,000 words swam through Darien's head. There had been no time to rehearse.
I came to ask you, leave this ship with me.
An inscrutable expression rippled across Bluebeard's face.
You returned to ask me?
To ask me to leave my ship? Even knowing what I promised to do to you if you betrayed me. Darien took another step.
The Kraken is done. We can leave together, never look back at the people we've been.
Bluebeard shook his head and let out a sigh that almost became a gasp.
Would that I could,
he smiled ruefully.
Even if I look away from who I've been, it will still be there. I'll always be this man, the man before you.
Darien's fingers clenched around the grip of his sword.
Let it go. It's enough already. Let it go. You don't have to be this man any longer. I know. I believe you can be someone good.
Bluebeard smiled, a small thing that just touched the edge of his lips.
Some things can't be changed, lad.
He took his hand from his side and held it up. Red glistened in the flickering lights. Darien saw all the things he had not wanted to see. The sweat, too heavy to be explained by simple exertion. His pale pallor. The dark growing stain on the captain's fine coat. The pool of blood at the foot of the chair. And the tears in the corner of the old man's eye. Darien stifled a sob.
What?
Dragoneye, Bluebeard spoke softly. Shortly after you left the bridge, he challenged me for this sword. He knew what you and Gent were about, of course. Knew that I would be distracted. Darien glanced at Night.
But he didn't get it.
Bluebeard smiled. Pain brought a distance to his eyes, but his voice remained steady. He places far too much trust in his eye. Take it away from him, and he doesn't know what to do with himself. Darien remembered the cut on Dragoneye's face. It had been right above the pirate's mirrored eye. Had it been more than a chance wound?
I don't understand. What is he? What is that eye?
That eye is... Bluebeard grimaced and clutched his side. Sagging, he nearly slipped on his own blood, but Darien took him by the arm and eased him into his seat. On the view screen, a great ship swung into view. It dwarfed the Kraken. Scorch marks and a chipped and cracked hull defined Bluebeard's ship, but this vessel shimmered as though it had just been cast. Where the Kraken had edges as sharp as a jagged knife, this ship had only smooth curves. Where a grasping sea beast adorned Bluebeard's ship, the sigil of a bull had been proudly painted on this ship. A light blinked on a console built into the arm of Bluebeard's chair. "Curse that ship," he muttered, and slammed his fist down on the controls. The screen shifted to the image of a nondescript man of indeterminate age standing on a blue-carpeted bridge with his hands clasped behind his back. Men and women bustled between consoles in the background. They wore navy blue uniforms so sharp Gent would have been jealous. An insignia adorned the breast of their jackets. It looked to Darien like a Ragnar cat with the head of a woman. "Pirate vessel, this is Admiral Daedalus of the Sphinx ship Toraldin. Your ship is mortally wounded. I am duty-bound to request your surrender and to offer assistance should you submit yourself to the justice of the new empire. Should you resist..." He smiled, and Darien realized he did have a defining feature. A smile so cruel and cold it would have stood out even amongst Bluebeard's crew. "Well,
I have to admit, I rather hope you do resist." Bluebeard laughed. "New Empire? Do you expect me to take you seriously? I've seen the end that awaits empires. Submit myself to justice? There is no justice in this world for you or I or anyone. Those who claim to mete out justice can only do so by threat of violence and cruelty. No, your justice is a farce, just like your empire. In this universe, there is only the great dark depths of space, only the endless stars. The only true law is that of the night, and it cares nothing for the lives of men. I know that better than many. My ship may die, my men may flee, but I will never surrender to you or anyone else." His fingers danced over the console, bloody prints smudging the screen with every stroke. The bridge of the Terralden rocked, but Admiral Daedalus did not flinch. "Excellent." His smile sharpened, and his hand came to rest on the ornate handle of a sword at his side. Darien's blood grew cold. The Admiral wore an emerald ring, identical to the ring Darien had seen in his vision. "I've killed so many of you rats. But you, Captain Bluebeard, you've always managed to elude me. I couldn't believe my luck to find your ship here, of all places." Bluebeard leaned forward, red spittle on his lips. "Get on with it. I've not all day to listen to your nonsense." Bluebeard's words swept the Admiral's smile away, and the screen cut back to the view outside. The Terralden deftly dodged Bluebeard's next attack and returned fire. The deck shook, and Darien nearly lost his footing. He took hold of Bluebeard's chair as a wall of fire rose up outside the ship. Bluebeard focused on his console as though the Kraken weren't on fire and sinking, as though his blood hadn't soaked his jacket through, as though he didn't have the clammy, pale skin of a man near death. "There," he sighed as he drew his hand back. "I should keep the old bull busy. You've done mortal damage to my ship, boy, but the old girl has some tricks left still." Darien dropped to his knees. I thought I could save you, if I could just separate you from this ship." He rested his hand on the captain's arm. Bluebeard looked so calm, but Darien felt the shivers racking his body. An explosion cut off the captain's reply, and a torrent of wind and fire ripped into the bridge. The shockwave lifted them and slammed them into the opposite wall. They landed heavily, and Bluebeard let out a pained grunt. The wind wailed over the gaping wound that had been gouged out of the Kraken's bridge. For an instant, lying dazed on the deck of the ship, Darien sat alone outside his home. The wind swept the fog of his breath away. Smoke rose from the chimney. Inside, his sisters chatted quietly while his father hammered at a piece of broken equipment. That morning, it had been the sound he hadn't heard that stopped his heart. He hadn't heard the click of Kathy's knitting needles or the lilting lullaby of her voice telling another story of long-lost days. The cold wind had coiled tight around his heart that morning. It had been there, within him, all his life, but only now did he truly feel it. Only now did it bring tears to his eyes. Darien tried to blink the tears back and found himself sliding toward the sky. Bluebeard lay prone beside him, a streak of red tracing the path behind. The captain murmured, but did not stir to his feet. Another blast rocked the ship. Another wave of searing, smoke-choked air poured through the breach. The ship dipped further, accelerating their slide to the edge. Darien struggled to stand. His thighs screamed where Fantasia had stabbed him. He focused on the sharpness of that moment. He had truly believed she would kill him that day. Her hair had billowed, black as smoke from a dirty fire. He felt the same clarity now. That day, before the reflecting pool, he had wanted to live. He had wanted it more than he had ever wanted anything, save Kathy, alive once more. Now, though, he felt calm. He lay on the deck of a starship, and the clouds glowed with the reds and golds of sunrise. He could die here. It would be all right. Everything would be all right. Everything would. Unease stirred his sense of calm. He had promised Jen something, hadn't he? If he could only remember. If the ship would only stop shaking. If the wind would stop wailing. If the clouds would part. Just once if they would part. He flailed out and felt Bluebeard's hand, wet and cold with blood. He remembered all at once. He had promised he would save Bluebeard. Fighting through the haze that filled his mind, Darien stood and lifted the captain. He hoisted him over his shoulder and carried him up the bridge. The captain's blood soaked into his clothing, and Darien knew the old man didn't have long. He had to stop the bleeding. He eased Bluebeard into the captain's chair and stripped off his coat. Folding it over, he put it onto the wound in the captain's midsection and pushed down. Blood oozed around the coat. Even through the cloth, Darien could tell the wound went wide and deep. Bluebeard gritted his teeth and growled, his eyes flicking open. "Darien," he murmured, "we met once before, you and I, on a plane of dust and darkness. I was so young and so broken and so lost." I can't," Darien choked out. "I can't live with this." He pushed down harder and harder. He had to stop the bleeding. He had to save the captain. The Terraldan, wreathed in smoke and shadow, loomed beyond the bridge. The winds of six whistled across the torn metal, as sharp and cruel a sound as any wind had ever made. Darien pushed down harder. Bluebeard no longer grimaced with pain. A calm had come over his lined face. This wasn't working, Darien realized. He couldn't stop the bleeding. He had to get the captain to the med bay. He racked his mind, thinking of the supplies there, trying to remember the bits of first aid he had learned over the years. Darien wrapped his arms around Bluebeard to lift him, but the old man heaved back into his seat. "No," he waved to the door. "No." "I can't leave you." Darien took the captain's hand in both of his. "I'm going to get you out. I'm going to help you. I can do it. We're going to laugh about this someday, you and I, together, two friends." Bluebeard's eyes widened. Will you remember me as a friend after everything?" "Always," Darien whispered. "Always." Now it was Bluebeard's turn to wrap his arms around Darien. He pulled him into an embrace, his tears cold on Darien's cheek, his beard scratched, and Darien realized this wasn't just a nightmare. This was really happening. He wanted to scream, to rage against the world so cruel and cold. He wanted to pull Bluebeard from that chair and haul him from that sinking and broken ship. He wanted, but he could only cry in racking sobs that ached in his chest, worse than any physical wound. "It's okay," Bluebeard whispered in his ear. "You'll be okay. Let me go, lad. Let me go." He pushed Darien back with more strength than any man in his condition should have. He rested night in Darien's hand. How had the captain kept the sword through everything that had happened? But of course, hadn't that been the first lesson he taught Darien? Keep your sword close. Darien stumbled back, numb and blind, with as much choice as a leaf twisting on the wind. He found himself outside the bridge, staring through the window. Bluebeard drew a piece of blood-stained paper from his pocket and kissed it. Light barged into the bridge and banished everything. The hatch grew so hot Darien had to let it go. When the heat and light faded and Darien looked through the warped glass, he saw only sky where there had once been a bridge. Nothing remained of the room. Nothing remained of Bluebeard. A voice came to Darien as across a ravine, but he couldn't make out the words. He didn't want to hear them anyway. He just wanted to sit, for once to just be. No more worries about the future, about the past, about the present. The voice grew louder, more insistent, and at last Darien could ignore it no longer. Darien, you must move. Knight, the sword. Darien glowered down at it in his lap, where it sat across his legs. The ship groaned. The deck and the hull turned into a massive instrument playing a song too loud and large to be understood. Darien felt acceleration in the pit of his stomach and knew that soon the ship would be a tombstone in a crater. He could hardly believe the thrusters hadn't burned out yet. Darien, he did not wish for you to die. You must move. He sent Twilight after me. I suppose he just meant to give me a scolding. Knight sighed, and Darien felt irritation that the sword dared to put on the pretense of having lungs. I do not know what he planned exactly, but I do know he would not have killed you. You know it as well, I think. He was a killer, Darien shot back, spittle flecking the blade. Yes, he did many terrible things, but he cared for you all the same. Darien wanted to argue. He wanted to slam the sword over and over into the wall. He wanted to find the manual override for the bridge door and leap out the opening. When he'd been a child, he never thought about death, what it really meant. Even his mother had been just an abstraction. He had no recollection of her voice, of her face, of her hand soft on the side of his face. That had ended with Kathy. She died and forced him to face that all those he loved might die before him, and that he might be powerless to save them. People died in stories, but Darien had never realized how the words smoothed out all the edges. The hero never had to sit beside the person they loved most and watch them waste to nothing. The hero never had to hold the hand of that person, the shaking hand, and listen as they struggled for their final breaths. The hero never had to weep uncontrollably, broken and gasping. The hero never cried at all. In the end, everything would be all right for the hero. They would find the magic elixir and slay the dragon. The hero would save the day. Bluebeard's blood had already gone cold on his hands, on his jacket, on his shirt. Had Darien really let himself believe he could be a hero? After Kathy, had he really let himself fall for the ridiculous lie that he was anyone but just another person in a world far too big? Yet, Kathy had been the one to tell him that lie. She had spun it into every story. Her words had been the words of his childhood. The night she died, Darien thought they had left him for good. But over and over again, he had been unable to shake them free. They had been drawn to the surface. By an old bridge, by Marialla's mother, by an impossible sword, and finally by an old killer with one eye and a limp. Darien. Night drew him from his thoughts. Captain Bluebeard knew what I was. He knew? Good for him. I don't even know what you are, Darien hissed. Yes, Knight spoke in a measured tone. That must change. I should never have kept the truth from you. But we don't have time for my story now. It will have to be enough to say simply that Bluebeard knew I could speak, knew I could hear and understand him. He told me this after his fight with Dragon Eye. He left you something. Something he wanted to make sure you had when you left the ship. Darien could have asked more questions, but when he thought of Bluebeard, he could not think of questions. He could think only of the way his beard had scratched against Darien's cheek. He clutched the knowledge of Bluebeard's gift to his chest and stumbled down the hall. How much longer could the Kraken stay in the sky? How much longer could it withstand the Terraldans' attacks? Darien discarded all such thoughts. All that mattered was Bluebeard. Bluebeard's quarters waited for its owner, a calm in the center of a great booming storm. Terraldan had pockmarked the rest of the ship with gaping wounds. Fire hot enough to burn metal had begun to devour the inside of the vessel, and thick black smoke coiled in the belly of the beast. Hundreds of years seemed to have passed since Darien destroyed the star engine. What had been a home had become a labyrinth of ruined corridors, but still the Kraken held together. That Bluebeard's room had yet to be touched by the destruction surely spoke more to luck than anything, but Darien couldn't help read purpose in the state of the space. Papers still waited for attention in piles on the desk. The paintings still hung on the wall. The men within still fought the storm on a broken ship. A chair, pulled out as though waiting for Darien to sit, faced Bluebeard's desk. His bookshelf still overflowed with volumes, none of them dusty. The trunk behind the desk sat open. The lid leaned against the wall. In contrast to convention, no gold or jewels lay within, only scrolls and maps neatly organized. Darien recognized the map he and Gent had used to plan their escape. Without that map, Darien wondered, would any of this have happened? Maybe, if Bluebeard had not happened to collect this one small map of this one small moon, he would still be alive, and his ship would still be whole. If Darien had known where this map led, could he have done what he did? He couldn't answer that question, and it sickened him. Could he really have let this ship keep flying, knowing about Cassandra and the other prisoners? Could he have destroyed it, though, knowing that it would kill Bluebeard? He would never be able to forget what it felt like to push desperately against the old man's wound, to feel his blood flowing relentlessly through his fingers. Darien shoved the trunk away and kicked it so hard his toe cracked with the impact. The sharp pain only made him more angry. He found himself staring down into Bluebeard's chair. The captain had worn his shape into the seat. Darien brushed his fingers, still aching with the heat of the bridge door, over the indent. The chair, like the quarters, waited for Bluebeard to return. On the desk, Knight's voice intruded into the room. Darien followed the words and found a small wooden box tucked between the paperwork. He had seen it once, the day Bluebeard began telling the story of his past. He knew it held a reflective sphere. The wood felt rich with oil. The vibrant red of the grain reminded him of the clay he used to dig up with his sisters. He had shaped it into many things, but his favorite had been the starships from Kathy's stories. Heat from the oven had forged it into something strong, but not everlasting. One by one those ships had broken as Darien grew. The box clicked open. The reflective sphere, just large enough that it would have nestled perfectly in the palm of his hand, glimmered on a bed of red velvet. Looking down at it, Darien remembered the engine, its warmth in his hands, the feel and weight of it, and how easy and how hard it had been to let it go, to break it open on the floor. He heard the music again, had never stopped hearing it, that had poured from the broken shards. Tears came to his eyes once more, but now they were tears for Bluebeard's voice, a voice this room would never hear again, no matter how long it waited. Darien shook his head violently. He had grown so sick of the clammy chill of tears on his cheeks, the raw burning in his throat, the puffy edges of his eyes. He shoved his thoughts from what he had lost and returned his attention to the sphere. A seeing stone, Knight spoke reverently. Once the Empress planned that every captain in the Empire should have one of these. They proved too unpredictable. Only a few were ever finished, and of those few, I believe most were destroyed following the fall of Leviathan. For Captain Bluebeard to have one in his possession is truly extraordinary. Darien laughed, and the sound surprised even him. He was an extraordinary man. Knight's eyes flashed. Yes, he was. Darien reached for the sphere, but a distant boom stopped him short. Now, at last, the paper swooped from the desk. You must not touch it yet. Knight's voice cracked the spell of the sphere. I cannot say what might happen when you do, and this ship does not have long. We must flee. The final escape pod jettisoned from the ship shortly before you entered the bridge, but Bluebeard explained that there is yet a path off the ship. Darien listened numbly as Knight explained what he would have to do. He snapped the box closed and tucked it into his coat pocket. He backed through the room, trying to commit it to memory. He stopped at the door and took one last, long look at the painting. Now, at last, he understood it. He knew what it meant to cling on to something long after all hope had been lost. The lights failed halfway to the cargo bay. At several points, Darien had to change his route through the ship to make it around fires roaming the corridors. Crawling through a maintenance shaft, sweat dripped from Darien's nose and steamed as it landed on the deck. The bay became a cavern, just barely illuminated by the emergency lights. The deck had tipped so far down by now that Darien had to hold the sides of the doorway to keep from tumbling into the room. The depth of the darkness reminded Darien of the ravine, hungry and black, that he had traveled past with Tom. He checked to make sure that the sword Bluebeard had given him remained securely sheathed at his side, and then tightened his grip on Knight before stepping carefully down the slope into the bay. Step by step, he followed the sword's instructions to the furthest wall, the lowest point of the ship now. Silence had taken the ship. The Terraldan must have given them up for dead. They would let the carcass of the Kraken sink burning to the ground. A low moan howled in the darkness, like a Ragnar cat singing into the night. The ship rattled as it strained to hold together. Darien felt along the wall, the bulkhead cool against his burned fingers. Rivets, seams, and empty hooks passed under his fingers. He felt dents worn into the ship, scars it had borne for so long. It would not have to bear them much longer. The Kraken spasmed so violently that it threw Darien to his knees. A deafening rumbling groan echoed through the corridors and rooms of the dying ship. A beat of silence followed, and then a muffled boom that did not send even the slightest shiver through the ship. Darien stumbled up, confused and dazed, and then all at once understood. The ship had broken in two, and part of it had fallen to the moon below. "We don't have long," Knight's voice remained unsettlingly calm. "Your grasp of the obvious is staggering." He wanted to fling the blade into the shadows. It had led him here. It had brought all this to pass. He couldn't bring himself to let it go, though. Bluebeard's last act had been to hand him the sword. In a way, it had been the crux of the bond between them. He couldn't toss it aside so easily. Another thing, buried deep, nagged at Darien. He wanted to know the mystery of this talking sword. Darien reached up once more and furiously scrambled along the wall. At last he felt it, the bulk of a bag. He pulled it down and slid it on. As he fastened the straps, he tried to make sure he didn't miss anything. He knew there would be no trying this a second time. "You're sure about this?" he asked Knight. "It is unorthodox for a starship to have parachutes, but then Bluebeard was an unorthodox man in many ways. He told me that this might be your only way off the ship." Darien made his way into the airlock and closed the inner door. A stillness lay within the small space, at odds with the chaos raging through the ship. Darien took a brief moment to savor it, before opening the outer door. It resisted, but with a grating groan gave way and rolled to the side. Light rode in on the wind. Creeping to the edge, his hands tight on the rail that ran the length of the room, Darien saw wreckage smoking in a crater at the foot of the tower. The smoke twisted into the morning sky. Mountains cut against the horizon, and a scattering of trees grew amidst the crumpled ruins below. Darien felt a twist in his stomach at the sight of the trees. How many hours of his life had he spent in the branches of a tree reading, playing with his sisters, or just sitting to feel the breath of the sky through his hair? His sisters had been too old, but they had played hide and seek with him. He remembered running breathless between the trees. He had climbed it up into the spindly limbs and hidden for what felt like hours. Time hadn't mattered. He could have waited an eternity. Once he had leapt down right behind Sally and howled in his best imitation of a Ragnar cat. He hadn't been allowed to climb a tree for weeks after that. I just want to go home. His voice couldn't cut the wind. I know, Darien, Night replied. For years, before you found me, I would have wept for my home. If only a sword could weep. Darien took a deep breath of the wind. Before boarding the Kraken, he had not realized that air could be unique to a place. He had never known, when Kathy told him stories of other worlds, that to visit another planet would mean leaving the air of his home, and maybe never breathing it again. He held the breath, savored it. He bent his knees and felt dizzy, both from the distance to the ground and also from a giddy readiness to return there. He sheathed Night beside the sword Bluebeard had given him that first day with the pirates. He had considered leaving it behind to fall with the ship. He put his trembling hand on the hilt. It had been Bluebeard's. He thought of all the times when the captain's hand had rested where Darien's did now. He leaped away from the ship as far as he could. He left the place where he had come to know Bluebeard. He left that place forever, and the sky of his home welcomed him. Unconnected to the ground or even the transitory deck of the Kraken, Darien found himself freed from all the expectations and responsibilities that bound him. His tangled hair whipped around his face. He looked up and saw the ship, once a full curved dagger, and now just half that. It angled down, the blade seeming almost to drive for Darien. Fire flicked tongues from dozens of wounds along the hull. Darien tried to believe that he had lived for months on that ship, but the further he careened away, the less real it all seemed. It must have happened to someone else. Looking at what remained, he struggled to believe anyone had ever lived there. Not even on the ground yet, it had become just another ruin. How I missed this. The height, the rush of the wind, the speed. Night spoke in a voice more human than many of the pirates. I don't know how I survived down there, so far from the sky. It can't be true. It can't have been me, down there, so far from the stars. Darien felt shocked to hear the sword echo his own emotions. An eruption of sound rocked the wind, and the ship split apart along the seams the Terraldan had torn into her. He had not sighted their adversary, but had no doubt they must be watching their quarry sink from the sky. Chunks of metal whistled past, and still more debris fell on every side, some of it still burning. Darien knew there was nothing he could do if his path met the path of the wreckage. He had done everything there was to do, had made every choice, and now a sense of peace came over him. The wreckage of the Kraken streaking past, Darien thought of a moment when he and Kathy had sat outside at the trailing edge of summer. It had been evening, and the sky had been still. She had spoken softly, a story he no longer remembered, and in the midst of her words a trail of light had broken the clouds and slipped over the horizon. In that moment, Darien's chest had filled with the realization that things could change. Even the shrouded sky of Six could break open and reveal something beautiful and impossible. So much had happened since that day, and now Darien wondered if he could ever be that little boy again. How far away had he traveled from that moment? Could he measure it in something so simple as years? Or did that precise number miss something fundamental about the distance? If he reached hard enough, might he brush his own feather-soft hair? If he called loudly enough, Would Kathy pause her story and look around for the source of his voice? If only he had time enough, would it all loop back around, like traveling around the circumference of a world? Could he return to that moment and sit beside Kathy once more? Just once more, could they watch the sky open? He thought, even if he had all the time in the universe, he would never be able to return to that moment in time. The sticky warmth of Bluebeard's blood would always stain his hands, and the image of tears in the old man's eye would never leave him. Darien looked out over the world. Every second brought it closer. Never before had he seen so clearly the way time pulled him away from who he'd been. Every floor of the tower that passed was a floor of his life he could never visit again. Every plume of smoke below, just another room of Bluebeard's ship he would never see again. How long before he fell so far he could never return home? Would a day come when his sleeping mat beside the stove became as impossible to return to as the steps beside Kathy, as the corridors of Bluebeard's ship? Would he never see his sisters again, never chase them through the trees, their laughter dancing in the sky? Had that day already come and gone? The questions flew by as quickly as the wreckage. Now, Darien, pull the cord now. The fabric of the chute unraveled with a clap and a snap that jerked his whole body. He let the wind carry him from the burning wreckage of the ship. He waited for the ground under his feet. He waited for the moment when he could return home. Next season on Palace of Mirrors. Once I believed the world would be what I would make it, but that was just the folly of youth. Darien and Knight continue to journey to the city, hoping to rescue Marialla, but just because they've escaped the Kraken does not mean their path will be a simple one. The powdery dirt exploded under their racing feet, and the air grew hazy. Darien and Cassandra were 15 feet from the door when the furthest wall of the dome exploded. Glass, metal, and steam burst from the explosion. They find the city torn apart by the brutal policies of King Masterson, who seized power from the Democratic Council. In this abandoned and forgotten cave, the hungry, the lost, and the broken had come to find hope in a world that had given them none. Much stands between Darien and the end of his quest, and nothing is certain beneath the clouds of 6. The figure stood before them. He wore no cloak or jacket. He leaned out over the wall and looked down on the crowd. Even from 15 feet away, the gleam of his eye brought goosebumps to Darien's skin. "Dragon Eye," Darien breathed. Thank you for listening to Palace of Mirrors. If you liked the show, please rate it on your platform of choice and share it with anyone you know who might enjoy it. Also consider joining my Patreon. Search Palace of Mirrors. Thanks again to all my listeners. I truly appreciate everyone who has taken this journey with me. This podcast was produced, written, and narrated by Matthew Lindquist, with music by Nature's Eye on Pixabay.